with Khalil. How are you doing today, Khalil?
I'm doing good. It's my second day here in Amsterdam, visiting my brother and business partners. So I guess it's a better time zone to overlap with yours.
Right. Yeah.
I'm based in the
Time zones
Philippines,
are
by
a
the way.
funny
Yeah,
thing.
yeah.
I'm a globalist, so I would prefer that we abolish time zones and just have one time, and then different cultures kind of decide different. They ascribe different significance. So if you happen to live in one era, you would say, "Oh, it's 8 o'clock." That means it's probably sunset for another person. It would be 2 o'clock or something. It'd be
Mhm.
12 o'clock, whatever. And some kind of 24-hour clock also makes a lot more sense to me. That's one of those things. I think the French revolutionaries tried to address this. It's kind of
Mhm.
funny that they were sort of hyper fixated on things that we might consider pedantic. Um, but maybe this is an area that we have a mutual interest in is kind of ancient religion and the connection here is numerology. So why is it 365 days?
Mhm.
Well, there's 360 degrees in a circle. I think the one is derived from the other, but I think there is some kind of Babylonian based 12 system, and so if you have 12 months, you're trying to do a lunisolar calendar. 360 makes the most sense, and then there's 5 days tacked on at the end. Not exactly where the 4 weeks and 7 days in the week comes from. I think that must be the 4 quarters of the moon, right? So you're taking an astrological phenomenon, the moon and the
Mhm.
sun, which are not really neatly coordinated, and you're trying to fit them into some kind of proportion. But the French revolutionaries said, well, we don't like this kind of base 12, base 60 system that's kind of this ancient religious thing. It should all be the metric system. It should all be base 10, so it's
Base
uniform.
10, yeah.
And that makes a lot of sense to me. But for some reason, the English language has had this tendency, and English culture has had this tendency to resist the metric system in a way that Europe hasn't. Europe has had this tendency to just say, okay, well, yeah, we're gonna go over to kilograms
Mhm.
and kilometers, and the Anglo Americans have said, no, we do miles and we do feet and we do
Yeah, yeah.
gallons, and they've like it's very, and is that a coincidence that English is the language of the modern world, and at the same time it's the language of the people who refuse to conform to the rest of the world, and so they make the rest of the world conform to them? I don't know.
Nassim Taleb had something to say about that. It's like the older system of like feet and yards or whatever. I mean, it has gone through like usage by like it's like an organic creation of the people or something like that. But like the metric system was like from top down, some scientists or whatever scholars thought of this system. Um, yeah, so it's maybe there are some things which are better, what you call this, left to the to evolution, natural evolution, rather than an authority dictating the the right system. At the same time, it's coordination is much easier if you have like a single language. Like the it's like for our time zones, no? If we sort of understand like what we're talking about, if we meet at this certain time, rather than like each of all of us have used like the 24 hours in a day and like 7 days a week. So with that universal language we could have this like coordination even prior to the invention of like this online calendar, and which has made it much easier. So earlier before when we arranged this, I thought this was 12 noon. It turns out to 1 p.m. and it was just the calendar which sort of like allowed me to see that.
So I was just checking out your Substack, and one of the you're working on a book called Raja versus Conquistador: Operating
Hmm.
Among Psychopaths and Psychic Megafauna. Um, I wrote an essay regarding psychopaths where I say, uh, like most things that we would call mental illness, psychopaths are uh, an extreme, they represent an extreme
Hmm.
tendency that is ultimately necessary, that you
Yep.
can't,
Yeah.
at
Yeah.
least within, like, I don't know, maybe in an ideal world where we can change human nature or whatever, but given that, the rules of the game as they are, we're going to need to sort of utilize psychopaths. So what is your take on psychopaths? How do we operate among them? Can we use them? Can they be productive members of society?
Yeah. I don't remember why I got into this kind of like interest, and perhaps it's because of like uh, engaging with some of these people. But you're correct. Like the concept of a psychopath was a recent invention in the 20th century. Prior to that, I mean, there was no concept of this being a pathology. So I realized this as I was writing this book because I'm writing it as if it's 1521. So the setting of this book is like in 1521 when Magellan arrived in what is now the Philippines and got killed. And in my story, and this is my interpretation of history, it was his like power game with the local Raja. And today we would label this Raja as a psychopath. Even the conquistadors, like Cortes, was like much more psychopathic in our language now compared to Magellan. But as you mentioned, they are a necessary consequence, I think, of our evolution. Like there seems to be a um, two poles that pull like the behavior of people in evolution. One is like the role of the person who prioritizes harmony and peace. So, for instance, this tendency to like to give in and to lie just for the sake of peace. But at the same time, imagine you have a tribe like that, and then you have another tribe who has a psychopath, someone who desires power and sees the world through power. This group will dominate the other one. No? So the ones which have psychopaths and who could utilize psychopaths would dominate. So it is conserved, but at the same time, you couldn't have like a society full of psychopaths or 100% psychopaths. Most of the humanity must be in today's language, extremely online language, must be normies. No? And yeah, now remember where I started my interest in this is actually this series by Venkatesh Rao on The Office. I don't know if you encountered that.
No, I haven't. Tell me about it.
Yeah. So this is like I guess my first experience of being a black pilled. Like I was reading this, and he uses the American series, The Office, as like a palette for describing the what you call this power dynamics within an office. No? And he presents three archetypes. One is the sociopath, the other is the loser, and the other is the clueless. Now, so that when he presented that the triangle of like power players, no, at the top in companies, and most of the people are like losers from this in that model, and they're also like middle management, true believers, which he calls the clueless, the people who don't really see the power game but believe in the propaganda of the company. Now it's like true believers in the company. So when I read that essay, it was like it just fits so well with my experience in the corporate world, in companies, that but at the same time I didn't want to believe it. It was just too dark. So it took me like 5 years to actually like go beyond that and create um, a less or a more positive view of that. So I realized what he was doing, what Venkateswara was doing, was viewing these three archetypes from the perspective of power. So the sociopath is like it's almost like a hero there. No? The loser is called the loser because like they see the game of the sociopath, but they just play with it. And I see this a lot with especially in government institutions here. These people know that the big guy, you just play along with him or her. And then, but what I see, and I was like, if this is why it was so what you call this unnerving, is because I was I was also a true believer. I was like that clueless persona. So the solution I found was like these are actually to give the perspective or to see the world through each of these archetypes. So the epistemology or the lens of power, the lens of harmony, and the lens of truth. So there are three ways of approaching the world, three ways of what you call this, playing three different games. So that allowed me to like move in different like or understand people's games through different lenses. Like for instance, this book I'm writing right now, my native epistemology is the epistemology of truth. Like I write because like this represents reality, no? And like being a scholar or being a writer, it's like that's your default mindset. So this model allowed me to understand like what this guy, this Raja, was doing. No? Because prior to that, in our history, the history we're taught, it just doesn't make sense, because like actually historians avoid talking about him because it doesn't fit the nationalist, post-colonial nationalist story. He essentially massacred his allies, who were Magellan's crew. Um, but once I viewed his action as if he were a modern Filipino big man or politician, so it just made sense. It just made so much sense. So I felt I needed to write this work of fiction by like uh, using the historical and anthropological record as my limits, but within that create a, a, a story as insane as possible with the Raja as a psychopath, and just it just makes so much sense that the story now becomes like flesh and blood rather than just like this which calls something recorded by Magellan's scribe Pigafetta, and to him it also when we read him it also didn't make sense. But now, like me knowing the archetype of the Southeast Asian big man or Orang Besar, it's, I'm really enjoying writing the story. So anyhow, that's also where I see how um, sociopaths or psychopaths were utilized within cultures because the Austronesians dominated and displaced the earlier tribes who were in what is now the Philippines. So they are now, many of them are still in the mountains because they are similar to all these tribes that anthropologists study, where it's very egalitarian. So they're always they any attempt to dominate. I mean, they would immediately cut you down. If you're if you like become a great hunter, it's like the tall poppy syndrome. But with the Austronesians, the seafaring Austronesians, so they had datus, which are like chieftains. So they were able to utilize that epistemology of power, people who perhaps are born with it, and then you are like trained in that game, you have models of like what it means to be a dominant man, and being a warrior, eliminating your enemies, protecting your tribe. um, so they displaced those earlier tribes because they have a like a better political technology. So I think that's the how cultures utilized that the sociopath, and then we we could bring it to the present, where because of initially I thought it was because of Christianity, like Nietzsche's like interpretation that it's like this is the what you call this, the morality of the slave morality was, or the master morality was slave by replaced by slave morality. But if you look at the what you call this, like the stories during Magellan's time, they had also models, Christian models of powerful men, like the knights, the kings, the Christian kings, uh, Saint Ferdinand, for instance. So these were all in Magellan's models of what it means to operate well. So I'm right now. I'm also going deeper into the literature and conquistadors and their mindset, and then they clearly had a model of a powerful Christian, and so I think a better interpretation or explanation is like it was World War II, perhaps, with the horrors of Europe and the Holocaust, that people uh, started to fear and demonize power. So that's the model I'm what you call this using right now to write this book. So meaning I'm trying to go back into the mindset of like the Raja being brought up in that epistemology of power, and also the mindset of like a conquistador, Magellan, a Christian power player. So that's the two mindsets I'm trying to like bring together, and so the conflict there will be the drama of that story, and also later on I will be commenting on that, like trying to understand our own ways of looking at the world, particularly for us, like post-colonial nationalism is a big, like what you call this, lens that we are brought up with. So how does that um what you call this change, or how does that influence how we view history, for instance, and how we view power? Yeah, did that answer your question?
Well, I guess I wanted to respond to that. I have an opposite view about World War II rather than seeing, because basically you're saying there are sort of three stages of history. There's a primordial egalitarianism, which is followed then by this emergence of psychopathy, or we could call it like an alpha beta dynamic,
Mm-hmm.
where there is a culture of submission to men who, for whatever reason, inborn or happenstance, they acquire some kind of power. So that progression from egalitarianism to hierarchical societies, um, does it happen in just one place? Does it happen slowly, gradually over time? But however that happens, because it's so deep in history, we're maybe talking 3,000 years ago, 10,000 years ago, right? We're talking about these huge time scales, and so in the mind, it's very easy to model this as like a slow, gradual shifting of color from like a blue colored society to a red colored society. There's some purple in between or something. And then it seems like you're saying, well, these hierarchical societies emerge 10,000 years ago, or certainly they're around 2,000 years ago, whatever they're around at the time of Christ. But then, for whatever reason, in 1945, all of a sudden that the big man hierarchical model There's a big, strong man. There's a king. There's some glorious psychopath who's at the top, and everybody worships him. All of that comes crashing down because of World War II. And I have the opposite view. I actually view fascism as a revival of the big man, a temporary revival, a revival that was almost and if you read the architects of fascism themselves, they will say we are trying to transport medieval values into the present day. We're trying to transport feudal values. We're trying to create knights and chivalry and return to these ancient values, these primordial values that they saw as the originary values of culture. Spengler talks about the barbaric origins of culture. There's an analysis, the tripartite class analysis, where you can say this is worshiping the warrior king as the head of society, as opposed to the priest or the merchant. And so when I put it in that tripartite analysis, then what I see, then I have to ask myself, well, when did feudal medieval Europe end? And most people would say, well, it ended with the Renaissance, which is like, the 1500s. I am becoming increasingly strong in my opinion that's not correct, that we should really be looking at the 12th century. And this is the period of the Crusades. And I see the Crusades and the conquistadors as not just parallel or two different phenomena that have similarities, but actually I see it as the same fundamental phenomenon, which is that you have societies which are becoming increasingly complex, increasingly mercantile, increasingly capitalistic, where instead of kings going out on a horse on a battlefield in front of their troops, leading the troops into battle like a psychopath would, they're a little bit smarter, and they tax their populace. They then use this tax money to hire mercenaries, and they then use these mercenaries to fight on their behalf, so they don't have to die in battle, and they can have a much more stable form of governance. So that model, which was becoming increasingly popular in the 12th century, and later led to early capitalism, it was sort of squeezing out psychopaths from society, where previously during the Viking Age or the age of Charlemagne, these psychopaths would have been on top. When you read Norse law or Norse mythology, you'll find they had these apocryphal laws. So, they probably weren't real, but they had some moral significance. The idea was that you could challenge a man to a duel, and if you won the duel, which meant you killed the man, then you owned his property, his wife, his children, his house, whatever. That's not something we can even conceive of today, because you assume, okay, well, everyone would just be killing everyone all the time. Well, that's not necessarily true, because these hierarchies form. I mean, they form in nature as well. Wolves have these sort of hierarchies. And then the other factor is that you're continuously expelling psychopaths from your society. So psychopaths, as things settle down, as they get calm, as there's no active war going on, they kind of get irritated because they're uncomfortable in these stable mercantile or priestly hierarchies. They can't compete in them. And so naturally, that's what the Vikings did. And actually, again, the Viking explorations, or you could even call them expulsions, not in the sense that there was some government that was expelling these people, but they were ejections, you could say. This actually had been going on for thousands of years. So we have genetic evidence for this. We have linguistic evidence for this, that the Germanic language family starts in Scandinavia and then penetrates into Europe and spreads into Europe. So that it's almost as if like there's a geyser, or there's a crack in a dam and there's water pouring out of the crack. That's kind of the model, is that you have this pressure of a stable society that keeps generating psychopaths. They're not comfortable. They're agitated. They're not able to fulfill that warrior hierarchy. And so they continuously go on adventures. They try to go to, you see this in the Odyssey, where Odysseus that Troy has just been conquered by the Greeks, so it's under a new regime. It's under this pan-Hellenic coalition, this kind of early sort of empire. It's all these different city states under Agamemnon, and he escapes as a refugee because he's not comfortable. He doesn't want to say, okay, well, I'm just going to submit to the Greeks. I'm going to learn Greek, and I'm going to, be part of their system now. He says, no, I'm going to go on an adventure. And the first thing he does is he goes and he raids the coast of Africa. And it's, again, something that is not recognizable from a Christian perspective to say, oh, look, there's a town. It looks unguarded. Let's go steal their stuff. But that is the mindset. I mean, and you find that in any video game today, right? Whether it's Mario or, Grand Theft Auto, it's the same ethic. You run around, you kill people, you acquire money. Like this is the ethic.
But it's the same thing with what you call this conquistadors. I mean, Cortez, Magellan. I mean, they followed the same mindset and model as the Romans. I mean, I'm reading this dissertation right now on the conquistador Miguel Lopez de Legazpi, and the writer traces the Roman, what you call this, operating system, for war and conquests, all the way to the Spanish conquistadors. And before reading that, I thought like Machiavelli was like a return to like the more practical operation of war, but it turns out to just following this long tradition of the Roman approach, except the addition of the just war theory due to the Christian influence. Anyhow, going back to what you mentioned of this like model of like the psychopath being developed, it was present among our primate ancestors, with the figure of the alpha male, no? But according to this book, what's the name? Corruptible by Brian Class, which is like about psychopaths in power. What the reason why there became egalitarian societies was actually the development of the human shoulder, which allowed for ranged weapons. So that tipped the balance from like the powerful alpha and controlling all the betas to like the betas, having this advantage of having ranged weapons. So that's he has a chapter on that, gathering like the different what you call this studies on that evolution, and this also like you mentioned the modern disappearance of the psychopath. I think it's better to call it the epistemology of power or the power player rather than that very warlike, what you call this, vibe of the term psychopath or sociopath, because they just changed their playbook. Now that, techno capital has dominated the world, instead of gaining power through war, you could gain power through the corporation dealing with capitalism and organizations, leading organizations, or working with nation states. So, which is like perhaps the most uh, the default way for power players to gain power. Um, if you look at I don't know if you've read my essay in Seeds of Science, where I tried to what you call this. One of my like, so I'm studying anthropology right now. Aside from this, big man or bizarre interest, and also like Rene Girard's scapegoat mechanism, is my interest in using the insights from sociology and anthropology for operating in daily life. And I think a way to communicate that is by seeing these cultural forces as beings. And because when you do that, it's now visible how power players, one of their key talents is to be to collaborate with these large cultural forces. So originally, this is the one, the ancient cultural force was the scapegoat mechanism, no? Which is to zero hard, he calls it Satan. So essentially, like a psychopath would collaborate with Moloch in order to gain power. The ability to move people towards a certain enemy, your scapegoat, is like a what you call it, a powerful tool, which is still in use now. Yeah? So I shared with you that article I've recently submitted, and it's like I trace the scapegoat mechanism in like ancient Balinese rituals, all the way to like the massacres in Indonesia and the Philippines from the 17th century and 20th century. So I think that is one ability or tool of power players is to use that. But as you mentioned, now in this modern world, so you have massive forces of like the nation state and techno capital. Someone who desires power or influence could also work with these entities. What to the like as a politician would be given power by the nation state in exchange. He would run this massive operation of ensuring the growth and continued existence of the nation state. Like for instance, for in the Philippines, is that's basically like the nationalist education. Believing that you should uh, give your life for the country. And we are one people, and all that. And also the power of like techno capital. If you look at it as an entity, you could see that it also desires to grow and to preserve itself. And it will give power to those that serve it, like entrepreneurs and like, I mean, even a consumer laborer is exchanging part of his or her mind and their time for money, which they could use for exchange in the system. Anyhow, I find that way of like seeing these forces, which I call like an anthropology through an animist lens, as helpful as well in understanding how people gain, or psychopaths, or people who desire power to gain that today's world. There are more options rather than just pure force.
Yeah, yeah, that's interesting. I think I was going to ask you that question on Psycho-Fauna, but I think you sort of explained it. Um,
Mhm.
I I was curious as to so analogous terms might be a spirit, or Jung has,
Egregore. Yeah.
yeah, the egregore. I think Jung has the concept of the collective unconscious, and like
Mhm. The
he writes that
archetypes.
in there are these archetypes like Wotan, and it's this there's this subconscious, uh, or almost as if we can think of our collective unconscious as having geological layers, and that something might not be immediately apparent, but that doesn't mean it has disappeared. It's just sublimated, it's just hidden in the subconscious, and it can be activated, it can be accessed through some kind of method. And the concept of going down into the cave is a common metaphor for trying to access those subconscious forces. The way that you describe things with the word fauna, I'm imagining kind of like an alien planet with sort of weird creatures walking around, and you've got to somehow access that, or you have to somehow go into that environment, whether that means going to another dimension or getting in a rocket ship or going underground. Like, you have to somehow transport yourself into an area where you can interact with these creatures, and the more that you're able to um, it also reminds me of the Jewish concept of demonic summoning. So Solomon
Hmm.
is supposed to have these seals where he, through the manipulation of sigils, he's able to incarnate or summon these demons. And because he's wise, he's able to contain them within a prescribed area,
Mm-hmm.
and he's able to control them, and he's able to use them. So you can ask them certain questions. This is, I believe, where the legend of Faust comes from. There might be some people who dispute that, but certainly there's parallels there, right? You're summoning this entity, you're gaining knowledge, you're gaining wisdom. Obviously, we do that with our computers, we do that with our phones. We're kind of interacting with this technology. We don't understand how it actually works. It's kind of magical, but nonetheless, we're using it for better or worse. And the worst aspect, obviously, is social media could be addictive, it could be harmful, it could make us depressed. And so, as much as we're trying to manipulate these, I think the reason why I like the term fauna is because um, fauna it's somewhat of a neutral scientific term, but it's also indicative of a kind of wildness. Like, these are not domesticated animals. These are not horses or cows or goats or sheep. These are wild animals. And so you may think that you've domesticated this wild animal, but it's still a dangerous
Yep.
wild animal. And at any moment it could bite you. It could just wake up and decide
Yeah,
it
yeah,
wants to eat you or something like that. So maybe
yep.
we have 5 minutes left. I want to let you riff on that concept and connect it anywhere you want to.
Yeah, I mean, I prefer the term because, like, the other terms like egregore or gods or spirit, like they sort of suggest that there's consciousness, but fauna is like they're more like animals. So I use this term first metaphorically as a way to like just make it more concrete that these forces are not merely like um, impersonal or do not have any like intent. So they have agency, and they they use that agency to change the world for their own survival and growth. So, and also it might be an actual explanation of what these things are. Like they emerge from human minds, and they actually exist. No? And then, like for instance, oh, how come like a psychofauna like the Philippine nation, I mean, could continue to exist throughout history, you know, while the minds that it subsists in or like emerges from, we die and live. It's like we are born, we die, so it continues. Or techno capital, so this this massive like dominant psychofauna now, how come it's like it continues to grow and it seems to have the power to move people for its own interests? So I think that's my main what you call this interest in viewing these creatures that way. First, it's very practical. I mean, if we're gonna talk to people about like for instance, my one of the main things I've encountered or the main um, one problem I see, especially with people who are artists and creatives, and it's hard to explain to them the system of like business and capitalism with a using the more what you call this left-brained way of like the usual concepts of business models and like so I feel like explaining how to operate you know, in this capitalist world and taking it and making some money or taking advantage of the power of the entity is to see it like what does it want and what do I have that I could be of exchange to this powerful entity because like a, a lot of people confuse their muses for techno capital. They seem to think that okay, this is something I'm good at. I'm inspired by this, and let me put in the work, and my muse will, award me with money and what you call as fame or whatever. But the thing is, like the muses only give you like creative rewards. If you want to, um, you know, get the rewards from techno capital, which is money, then you work with it. You work with the right psychofauna. Or if you want to gain power, I mean, the other option was it's a classic, working with a nation state, to be a politician or work with a politician, whatever. So that's my main interest in that concept is a useful explanation for people. Useful as in it will help them make decisions and live more a life with more agency by first of all acknowledging that these forces exist and they have power over us. But at the same time, we are the ones with consciousness. These forces are more like animals. They don't have consciousness, but they do have agency. They're also wild. They don't have morality or whatever. They could just kill people. So that's the what I've been uh, writing about and exploring.
Perfect. Yeah, we hit it right on the dime. That was great. I definitely hope we can do this again, maybe with some buffer time. And I'm sure we'll both have written more by then, so there'll be much more to talk about. But obviously, I want to give you the last word. Anything, if you're reading any other Substack writers, you want to shout them out, feel free to suggest
Mm.
people go check anything out.
Yeah, just check out my Substack. I have my recommended list there. These are people I follow and engage with. So yeah, explorations.ph. That's where I write at.
Awesome. All right, Khalil, I appreciate it, and hopefully we speak again soon.
All right. Thank you so much.
Take care. Bye bye.
Bye.
All right, guys, like it, restack it, comment if you're a loyal subscriber, paid or free. It always helps. We got to serve techno capital, right? We got to serve techno capital if you want me to get rich and famous. But if you want me to just passionately fall in love with my muse, then leave me a sweet little poem in the comments section. All right. Appreciate you guys. Talk to you next time. Bye-bye.